What I want to talk about is, good morning. To start, so two talks. First, we'll talk about some of the things that NIH has put in place specifically for neurosurgery to promote careers and career development, and how effective these have been, and how those in the audience who are still young enough to avail themselves, how they might do that and what tips might be useful. And then if we have time, can give you an update on some of the research that's been going on over the past few years, and some of the really neat implications it has for future neuroprosthetics. So we'll just see how the time goes here and what questions there are. But there's two mechanisms that exist that I've had the opportunity to be part of. And one of the phenomena that they're trying to address is global, and that is that it is taking an increasingly long time for people to get their grants. So the R01, which is for most, as almost all of you know, is the main currency in an academic career and scientific career. They fuel research, and it takes an increasingly long time. And this couldn't find an updated graph, but the numbers do seem to creep up even in the past 8 years. So you really, it's now become a mid-career award rather than the first award. And that's something that nobody is happy about. And in addition, there has been the perception that neurosurgery research has not been funded at a level that is appropriate. So a couple of things were done about this, and this, we really have to tip our hat to many of those that have been on council in the past, including several in this virtual room. But what Russ Lonser put together, and this will come out in JNS this month online, is a summary of what the NIH has done to address this problem, and the successful results of this comprehensive career development approach. So I'm going to reverse the order of this talk, show you what worked, and then talk about the steps that went into it working. So this is a graph that shows over the past 8 years how many neurosurgeons had grants. And the dark bars are new investigators, and gray is for older investigators. So you can remember gray for older, if somehow that makes a connection for you. And you can see that that number of established investigators for R01s on the left, for these collaborative awards in the middle, and then the unique combination of the two, really is all driven by new investigators, and especially those with these R01 equivalent awards, although a nice involvement in the collaborative awards as well. But you see the bar on the right and the black component of the bars on the left, rather, are what's been driving a rapid change. And this is unique to neurosurgery. So if you compare us to other medical fields, the change in funding has been dramatic, with essentially doubling it over the past 5 years. And that's not something that our colleagues have experienced. This is driven also primarily by those that have participated in the programs I'm going to discuss. So these aren't huge numbers, but you can see that the number of early stage investigators that did not go through either of the two programs I'm going to mention is there. So it's possible, but it does suggest that the combination of the value of the program and the program, to some extent, picks those that are likely to be successful, but encourages them to continue, as evidenced by the previous slides. So what are these programs? And we throw around a lot of alphanumeric terms. This is one version of an R25, but the one that I'm interested in is this program that was created about 10 years ago. It was around the time that many of the training grants that had normally supported residents became increasingly difficult to get, because the way NIH viewed it is they really wanted to see immediate results of training grants following the training programs. And that isn't what neurosurgery was delivering. So they created this program that allows for, basically gives you permission to submit a grant to support your fellowship year. And several of you on the call have been recipients of it, and several of you have been mentors of it. And the overall goal is to create scientists that will make these future advances. That isn't actually what their goal is. Their goal is to prepare you to get a K award or other independent funding. Saying that you're going to reduce the burden of neurologic disease in the absence of funding would be viewed as a failure of the program in the eyes of NIH. So you do need a Rosetta Stone to kind of figure out what they want. Here are the programs. That's us in the upper left. You can see that as many of the much of NIH funding, it's got some fairly focused distribution, and these are the ones that are explicitly neurosurgery programs. So it's a pretty elite group, but it also has expectations that we need to meet. Specifically, we need to be generating people that go out and get grants on their own. So how does it work? This is for the applicant, not for the program. Has a 5-year cycle, so we'll be due up in about 2 more years. I got to sit on that, actually chair that study section last time, and it was really interesting to see the combination of turning out people who submit grants, but also having a clear plan. So it may not always be evident to you, but we do have a plan for your training that applies, including talks like this. So the application is in October, typically in your R3 or 4 year. Multiple submissions from a program are allowed, and you can resubmit the following year if your schedule allows. They put it into one pot and then review it, but they have to give each program at least one. So even if they don't like our submissions, they have to give us at least one slot. And then the decision shows up whenever they feel like it, typically around the new year or something. It's been getting gradually later, and then you can start in April or a little bit later, as late as October of that same year. And a minimum is a 6-month rotation. That's usually more relevant for the neurologists who also are in this program, because their time in residency is shorter, and then you can extend it into fellowship time as well. And those are actually pretty easy to get, almost automatic if you've already been a recipient. And in fact, you can take it to one of the other institutions if they're willing to set up a fellowship there. The features that are probably even more valuable, because going in the lab is something many programs can provide, is you do get to participate in an annual retreat, which has a lot of us that go and provide very direct guidance and review of grants. The majority is neurology, probably about 2 or 3 to 1 that's represented there. And that, there's always differences between the two groups. They obviously have a neurologist have shorter residency. There's a lot of them, and there's a lot of funded neurologists which serve as good scientist mentors. And I certainly think we have good scientist mentors here, but we tend to be running around and handing out advice on the fly a little more than some of the more systematic ways that labs are traditionally teaching people to be future scientists. So I don't want to disparage it too much, because I think the results speak for themselves, but I think we do lose something in our do all things approach. So our model specifically is you apply in October of either your R3 or R4 year. It has to be cleared with your schedule, which means going through your program director, which is our chairman, Dr. Richard G. Ellenbogen. The research exposure includes through the grand rounds, through the seminars that we've had in our residency hour. I would say that's been a little difficult to make that stick, so we will continue to reinsert that into the teaching sessions, and then specific mentoring sessions with people whose labs you're interested in. I would call out that our vascular neurosurgery colleagues have been exceptional in this, and that's also see that in terms of the number of people who've come in with different ideas and then wind up doing research in vascular neurosurgery. So you have 1 year with some degree of protected time, both by the program and by both Dr. Ellenbogen and myself, vision of training you to be a surgeon scientist. You don't have zero call during that time, because that's not reality ever. And it's also not a good idea if you're going to continue to be an excellent surgeon, which is always the primary goal of this program. Actually, the primary goal is an excellent doctor, and then an excellent surgeon, and then a surgeon scientist. The department has extended these by 6 months of productive through philanthropy and other support, and ongoing lab support has been arranged in several instances. You can get elective time in your R7 year. We've done that. You must write a K award during that time. That's actually part of the rule of the fellowship, of the program rather. It usually gets derailed by your fellowship, which, so we're now seeing folks from the past, Dr. Kelly Collins and Brian Hannock, who are up now for their K award submissions. That clock is ticking because it just takes that long for the whole process to unfold. So does it work? I showed you the data that it does. We still need to contribute more from our own department to that pool of success, although we certainly have it from the past before the R25 award. It is a slow time frame to go from this first lab rotation to the K award. These are small numbers, so if we get one or two that get awards, we're going to look fantastic. And then there are other career pathways and other ways to reduce the burden of neurologic disease. So it is not, I do not want to fall into the trap that this is the only definition of success, far from it, but it is a means to an end. I like to show this slide. I can't pick on anybody in person, but one on the left is Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations. And we all at least pretend we know it was in there to be Renaissance individuals. But much fewer have heard of the gentleman, Ricardo, on the right, who talks about this concept of comparative advantage. And that is this idea that you should do what you are the best at, not necessarily, even if you're good at something else, you should focus on whatever you're the best. And so we're swimming upstream of that concept. We're also swimming upstream of some basic economics. And that is, for most clinician scientists, which are medical based, their pay is very similar to the NIH max. And most people who finish neurosurgical practices and go into a high volume surgical practice would expect to command a much larger salary. There is no good mechanism for dealing with this gap. It's certainly not something that you can or should get any sympathy from NIH officers or non-surgical medical faculty. And yet we've, at a programmatic level, struggled to understand how we'll get the best people if we pay them half of what they could get paid doing something else. So that difference, that delta, is a problem. I made this slide back in the Occupy 1% days, and that was just to point out that you're getting already from day one pretty close to the group that doesn't necessarily get a lot of sympathy. So you have to, the best advice I got on this was from a Nick Boulos in Atlanta, who was not necessarily where I expected to get good life advice, I'll say, for those that know him. But he's really framed it as, when you're going to a grant, what is it that only a neurosurgeon could do? What will only a neurosurgeon do, and what will a neurosurgeon do best? So focusing on those kind of questions, interventions, disease states, and patient material that we're most familiar with, I would argue are the best paths to success. And that, being specific, that may mean doing exactly the things that you see our department doing, whether it's clinical trials, whether it's obtaining biological material, imaging material, or using the operating room as your lab. Or asking questions such as spinal cord injury or other questions that really are driven by our practice. Brain tumors would be is probably the most traditional example of this. So the other, shift gears a little bit here and talk about the next step. So after the R25 is for residency, the K-12 and all K awards typically refer to training grants. And the K-12 is a mechanism that's used across different fields, specifically to support that field. And you have to be a little careful if you are too motivated and go to find it yourself, because the K-12 grant is given to an institution to create the program. The individual grants are then given through that mechanism directly. So the one that's relevant to neurosurgery is the NRCDP, and it is now, I believe, in its 8th year. It is a general mechanism of the K-12. Again, there's one in pediatric neurology, rehab, ICU, and they're actually increasingly being modeled after our program. And some of the other methods where they were given out to individual institutions are being peeled back, both in NINDS and other institutes. So if you search for it, you'll get this RFA, that's not what you want. That's what I want, and other people running the program want, and that doesn't fund you. This is what funds you. So there's you can just email me. But again, this is for when you're in as a faculty, your first year, not as a fellow, but as a faculty. And this is a program that then brings those 10 to 20 people together, reviews their grants, but also offers specific feedback and mentorship around the grant. There are also some other, prior to that, the Academy has a mentored program that Greg Zippel runs, and any of us would be excited to review what you have. The K-12 requires an institutional commitment of 5 years protected time. That means the institution has to figure out how to cover that salary gap and give you additional lab space. And that means 50% research that is, at least on paper, very strictly enforced. And if you are a state institution like us, you could be subject to an audit that would result in theory, penalties if you're violating that. They're very clear that being on call is not protected time. And the 5-year commitment allows for 2 years of funding with a possible extension to a 3. So it's really holding the program's feet to the fire and saying you're going to really commit to this individual in their career. That's the salary support, and then additional for supplies. It's not, doesn't get the grant administrator super excited because it doesn't have a large institutional support. We'll talk about that in some later slides here. So it's due the first year of your faculty position. You can't, this is not quite a true statement, but in general, it's designed for people going to a new spot so they get oriented and help with getting a head start. There are now mechanisms, the neurosurgeons and the Congress funded the Christopher Getch Fund, and actually originally that was given to a resident. We had the first recipient of that rotated up here, Hi Sun from Oregon, but they then converted it to fund a position that is not subject to these same regulations. So there is one position that allows you to stay in the same place you trained. The mentor and the plan is really key to this application. And there's the advisory team will review the applications. Unlike any other grant, they'll actually give you feedback on the application. And then there's a mandatory retreat in the fall where the applications are reviewed. That'll be virtual this year. But it's a multiple 2-on-1 interviews, a lot of hints from successful surgeon scientists and recent recipients, and a great opportunity for networking. So I know several of you went through it. Obviously the top applications, but there's been great success in those that didn't make the cut, but still were able to get feedback on that. So the application, unlike others, is quite brief. There is despite that, a big focus on the 2-page mentoring and career development plan, which doesn't have a lot of clues into what's being looked for there, but you really want to focus on what is the thing you're going to learn that's new. Chair letter promising time and resources, and the mentor letter are all key features. So it's a relatively straightforward application, and the references that all K awards require. So why in the world wouldn't you support research as a department? And the financials, I think, are fairly kind of speak for themselves. The clinical time is more valuable, at least financially, both to a department and to a hospital. And then yet at the same time, an institution like ours, which has depending on how you count, close to $1 billion in external money coming in, there's a return on that investment that's substantial. But remembering that the margin on a craniotomy, in fact, it's probably double this high number. So when you do that, there's a lot of people that benefit financially and would like to have as much of your time as possible spent to that. And of course, that's also delivering care to patients, which has a value beyond the finances as well. So when you get a grant, there's an additional portion that comes to the institution where the grant is. That's why institutions like you to submit grants through there. Training grants don't come with a large number, but the other grants do, sometimes up to almost 100%, so double the amount that you apply for comes in, the amount that you apply to actually do the research. That's true for many basic science grants and the rate that the institutions have negotiated. And you can see who benefits from this, so that 40% on the right are folks who want your money to build the programs or whatever else that they want to do. A lot goes into tuition waivers. Most grants don't cover all of the graduate student tuition dollars. And then in infrastructure, libraries, IRBs, and core research facilities. Surprisingly little actually goes into the buildings and maintenance of the buildings themselves. That historically has been well less than 10%. So sometimes the cynical NIH officer might look at this and accuse an institution of being a bank rather than an institution, but that's of higher learning. But this is the reality. So those are, why do you support? I think the departmental mission is 99% of it. You don't get much indirects, or you get virtually no indirects from these K awards. It is an element of a cohesive plan to increase the profile of the department, but I don't think you can make a very strong financial argument, so we do it because it's why we're here. You can see that this is again kind of the monies of things, and these are NIH dollars. So this is a few years old, and it's about 500 million of NIH dollars, which is higher now, but it's still roughly that range. And you get an approximate, depending on what you're doing, some of the basic science, a much higher negotiated indirect rate, but you can do the math and see that's a lot of money that comes in to the university itself. So what other options are there? In NINDS, which is the Neurology Institute, Neuroscience Institute, the next step would be typically be the K08 and K23. They're essentially the same grant. They are the same grant, come from the same pot of money and reviewed by the same committees. But K08s are for basic science, K23 for clinical research. And those are you hearing me okay? I'm getting a message that it's a little choppy.
Better now. Better.
Okay, thanks. So those are very similar to the K-12, other than they're 5 years in duration. A few neurosurgeons have, Eddie Chang, Dario Englet, have gotten this K99R00 award. That's a very competitive award that allows you to have K award funding, but basically guarantees during your fellowship or residency, and then guarantees that you have an R award when you start. So for a scientist, it's a very attractive junior investigator grant to have. And then several have gone straight to R01s. Our own Tim Lucas, after banging his head against the wall for a few years, broke through and has had funding through DARPA and through NIH mechanisms. So there are many rivers to the sea. Your grant, or it's all rivers go to the sea is the correct expression, but there are many different paths. So the specific aims are incredibly important in these grants. It's the first thing that are read. If a discussion is ongoing in a study section, it may be the only thing that a reviewer reads before casting a judgment on your grant. The feedback you get on these grants I find frustratingly brief, and maybe your only clue what to change, but it is in many cases worth responding and resubmitting. This is what study sections look like. They aren't going to look like this in the future, so I'm not quite sure. And of course, no stacks of paper anymore. But 2 or 3 people will be reviewing, and then you'll get something like this back that has bullets on what was good and what wasn't so good about your grant. So this was actually a grant that did well, and you get things. I think I wrote this and as a reviewer, and you get not very helpful things like your goals are a bit vague. How do you address that? But the reviews typically are 3 or more reviewers who score independently. If your scores are in the bottom half, you don't get a discussion at all. So all you'll get are these, telegraphed comments. Especially if there's no discussion, they can be brief, they can be flat out wrong, and they're typically contradictory. So you have to navigate that. Discuss grants will tend to coalesce a little bit better on a common theme, and you'll get a nice summary or a summary of the discussion. These minor weaknesses that can accumulate and torpedo a grant, there's no way to go back particularly and say, no, you got it wrong. And sometimes whether a problem is minor or more than minor is extremely subjective. I'm sure others that have been on more study sections can comment, but it does seem like the longer a discussion goes on, the more problems seem to come up and it doesn't go well. But occasionally single outlier negative score can be tempered. Most of the situations I've been in, things don't get funded unless they're in a 2 or a 3, and depending on who's running it, they really demand that this is an outstanding application, and no amount of strength can outweigh minor or numerous minor weaknesses. So that's the challenge. For R01s, you're up against a very large number of PhDs that come out. So the MD awarding is the dashed line on the top. That has been largely flat for decades, and the number of especially neuroscience PhDs has escalated dramatically. Skip that. And then one of the things that I've observed in myself is that you learn skills, and we learn surgery with very rapid feedback. delivered either by your attending or by the outcomes of the patient or both. And most skills you get the feedback fairly quickly. These are not quick feedback. You submit a grant and learn whether you did a good job or not somewhere from 6 to 9 months later. So it is a long process to get good at that for many of us. Some have a specific gift in that, and they run, and many of them are in our department. But for the rest of us, it takes time. And so you have to be prepared for when you don't have time. So there's, if it goes completely wrong, then there simply is no funding. Cast a wide net and try again and have a plan for when things don't work out and you have to withdraw. You know, the future, after that, we talked about some of the other mechanisms, the additional K award, several have gone straight to the R1. And again, the non-recipients have benefited from these programs as well. So the most important thing is to do it. And we have a great tradition in our field to draw from. So that's what I wanted to go over with the research situation. I think we probably should do some questions now, if that's all right. And then I can use the rest of the time to give a kind of 15-minute update on what our lab's been doing.
Folks out there and faculty too, because this is very applicable to our faculty for our series grants. Anybody out there? Jeff, I want to thank you. This is so essential. It's the, how do I put it? It's the character and essence of what our department does. Yes, it's a high volume neurosurgical department, but they're surgeon investigators. And of course, your middle name starts with George, and that generation, John and George and so on, picked neurosurgical subjects. The OR, you know, John did certainly pain, your father did epilepsy, but used the OR as their laboratory. And those have been successful. Now we see with Lewis and Mike, the same sort of, you know, success that way. And so great role models for the residents. Any questions from the residents? Or
well, yeah, maybe we can call out a few folks that have benefited from this. Dr. Hofstetter got to participate and maybe can talk about the non-fictional version of the pros and cons.
Christoph, yeah, good idea.
Yeah, I think thanks as well for Jeff. That was a great talk as always. I think seeing the insides of these grant mechanisms is always reveals so much and how to better sort of phrase and design these applications and grants. I think that, you know, I went through the whole, you know, K-12 mechanism, and I think it was, you know, you got a lot of feedback. I think it helps you to develop your ideas. I think it helps you to reach out to your peers and to your mentors. I think it was a good experience, even though we didn't get it in the end, but it certainly jump starts everything. I think, as you mentioned, I think nowadays it's good to look around too for other granting mechanisms. We have had good luck with the DoD, and there's philanthropy and other ways to fund your research that is, I think, very unique to neurosurgeons too. So I think outside the box too, even though the NIH is obviously the holy grail that we want to achieve.
Thanks, Christoph.
Thank you. Dr. Saigal, I think, also is swimming upstream with the rest of us here. I don't know if you, Roger, you have any insights.
Yeah, first of all, I would say going through that program was very useful and really good feedback. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful in getting that one, but it was very informative about just a grant process. And what I really liked is that we got feedback from a lot of different reviewers who each said different things, and that just helped me think about how to put them together. I have had a couple grants be successful in the last year and quite a few be unsuccessful. And I guess one of the things I've learned is that collaborating with other folks has been helpful in getting a better grant. Putting them together over many weeks with many weeks of feedback has been helpful for the couple that have done better than others. So, you know, I would just echo your points on that, but a super useful program, that NRCDP program.
Jeff, what about Sam and David and some of the residents that have swung the bat on this.
Yeah, Sam has just come off it. I'd love to hear his thoughts on, I don't know if Sam, if you've been to the retreat though.
Sammy? He was
Yeah, no, I didn't unfortunately get to go to the retreat this year because it was canceled for the COVID reasons. But the application process in general is pretty straightforward. I would just say, for advice for people who apply in future years, just to make sure that you have some solid preliminary data, either of your own or your mentors, to crib off and keep it lean and mean. Your reviewers have short attention spans and don't want to have to work too hard to give you the money. So keep that in mind.
That's great advice. Jeff, your thoughts?
David Bass, another recipient.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sam's advice, kind of keeping it lean and mean. I think being really easy to read, because the person reading it, I was always told, is going to be doing it in the middle of the night, like on a red eye on a plane. So just concise, straightforward language.
Dr. John R. Williams, who's recipient of NREF funding, I would like your insights into the process and what could be done different.
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm just talking through Sam's phone here. I think, honestly, my great mentor, and then also picking a topic that is interesting to reviewers, but not necessarily to neurosurgeons. So that's always a good strategy. In terms of what can be done differently on that, I don't know. Things worked out.
It's perfect. Yes. Dr. Levitt has started to, I think last year came to the retreat and has had a great track record of successful mentoring for these applications, but also got to really look under the hood at how this works. And I think sharing those insights that you shared with me in the past would be valuable. Mike.
Sure. So Jeff, great talk, and really kind of like Christoph said, really gets us a look under the hood. I think the key takeaways that I had from the retreat, and then also a recent call with Steve Korn and the POs of this grant to try to help people is like the lean and mean thing is key. What he made a big deal emphasizing was there are subject experts throughout the council, and so you don't need to go into a ton of detail on background, but what you do need to do is make your case very short and succinct, and then be really clear about what you will do yourself personally when you do this science. I think that was kind of the thing they underlined the most. So be very first person singular. I will do this, I will do that. And they also said something that I thought was really important, which was they understand that you're probably not going to be powered to find some, incredibly crushingly significant results. And that's okay. What you need to do is justify that you're laying the groundwork for a larger study.
Great.
Anyone else? Let's see. Bill Shane helped write the original, or wrote the original. I signed my name to it. Bill, any thoughts on looking back at what we tried to do, where we still need to tweak? I might have caught him off guard.
Maybe unmute himself.
Yeah. Let me call on Professor McDonald, perhaps, because she's also been a highly successful mentor here. What makes a good mentor-mentee relationship, and what would you like to see more of or less of?
Well, I would certainly say, the communication is key, and having, a general idea of, interests, and something that, while the balance of, writing to the reviews, but writing to something that at least will keep the resident phosphorylated as they go through the research project is a bit important too. And so, yes, it's a delicate balance, but really trying to, be mentally flexible to think about new ways to kind of investigate some of these domains and fields that, certainly had looks, but I think with the neurosurgery residents, they're uniquely positioned to leverage their expertise, but also the infrastructure in the department and the data that is currently available. One of the things, admittedly being on review panels myself, not specific to this, but at least a couple trainee panels, is that, is this realistic? A busy resident, can they do it? And so having that balance written into the proposal of things like data analyses, in addition to prospective procurement, for example, of data, I think can be helpful because it can show that, you're thinking about this, you have these great questions, it's clearly communicated, but also it's feasible and it's realistic to do within the time constraints of the funding mechanism. I'll stop there.
Well, keep phosphorylating. I love it.
Bill's unmuted now.
Oh, Bill. Yeah, Bill. Thoughts? Looking back. Oh, he's still. The other person who's spent many years getting these over the finish line, I'm going to call on Mr. Pridgeon if you have thoughts on what makes a good grant or doesn't at this stage. I don't think those lessons are going to change anytime soon.
No, it's universal that you have to start much earlier than you expect. You're going to have to, in terms of the writing, make sure that you're sharing this early on with collaborators and certainly with your mentor. Everything that you've mentioned throughout the talk, Jeff, and others who have contributed, I think is quite valuable. And simply writing the grants themselves, we have found over the years is quite valuable. I think that, these mechanisms are going to be changing a little bit going forward. But the other thing I guess I would mention is that other opportunities, NREF is quite important, but spending the time to research other opportunities and foundations outside of the K series or the R series is also quite useful.
So Jeff, can we ask the residents what it is we can do better to get them started early? Jim was pretty clear that, this takes a lot of work, and we have tried, and maybe it's my fault. I'll take all the responsibility and fault. But to get people as they get in their R1 year to start thinking about what they're passionate about in neurosurgery, and really start thinking about asking a question and writing a grant. It's, having a good question to ask. Anything we can do better, how we can help you better for the residents. These are for the junior residents maybe now.
I think we'll have to pick on one specifically.
All right, Maggie, you always speak up. Let me ask you, is there anything we can do better?
I don't think so. I think that we've done a really good job. I think what's really helpful is reaching out to the interns. Like I was set up with a mentor before I even started, like months and months before I even started, which was really helpful in kind of getting me involved early and all of us involved early.
Yeah, when you were born in Montana, we had set it up. So how about Dr. Rajiv Sen? Thoughts? You're always critical of me. Go ahead, be critical. What can we do better?
I believe Rajiv is in New York this week.
That's no excuse, Sammy. Okay.
Well, and there may be a delay in response.
Thanks. That's good, Sam. You got me on that one. Anybody else speak up? John Williams, Chris Young, please speak up. What can we do better?
Hey, Dr. Almogan, it's John Williams through Sam's phone again here. So one thing I want to point out is in my time here, things have gotten a lot better. Like significantly better. I think the addition of staff like Dr. Durfee has been incredible. And some of the junior faculty carrying the torch in terms of early mentorship and identification, and then also just knowing when deadlines are. I felt a little bit surprised when I heard about it. A lot of that was my own stupidity, but now, even if you're as dumb as I am, it's really hard to miss these things coming. and we're encouraged to find mentors much more quickly within the residency. So I think things have changed significantly for the better just during my time here. In terms of improvement, it's hard to say because I've seen improvement. So building on that without forcing early assignments on people may be challenging. Or changing the structure to favor research over clinical aspects, which I don't think is necessarily in anybody's best interest. So I think things are evolving already, and they're evolving in a really good and productive direction. And I think that's, even if the grant numbers haven't gone up, our research output and production, especially among the residents, and especially within the last 2-3 years, has really bumped up. So I think we're on the right track. It's been pretty awesome to watch.
Yeah, thank you, John. Actually, I apologize. The grant numbers actually have gone up. I focused on the NIH portfolio, but that's probably not a good way to fully represent what people are doing.
Yeah, and I that was very insightful, John, very helpful to us. I think, I'm looking at Louis, Sam, Mike, Manny. I think what I'd like to do is, I don't think that it's okay to say we either are clinicians or we're going to do science. That's the goal of this program, is to show you how you can do both. And our junior faculty, the guys that are not professors and content, have really led the way. There's no question that you are right, John. So more of these, Julie, I think the thing is more of these sorts of talks. Jeff's talk was just outstanding, and it kept it on the radar. I think getting Mike and Manny and Sam to give talks on what you can do and getting that in our minds. So Julie, let's do more of these talks. This was just, I know it was a last minute thing, but boy, this was insightful. Any,
yeah, if we have 5 more minutes, Nino has done a lot on,
Nino?
Yeah, I wanted to say something too, because often when we apply for grants, we think about getting protected time, getting money for research, but the motivation should really be, what problem do I want to solve? Right. At the beginning is basically a problem that I want to solve, and the grant writing is there to crystallize this idea. How do I want to solve that problem? And then the money will come if you can convincingly basically tell a story why this is important. And I think another issue is often that clinicians are very process driven. You do something and you think that problem is important, but often what the study section wants to see is a fundamental change, fundamental problem that you want to solve. And so I think often, for example, for me, the best grants that get funded are those that are really down to the fundamental question that, like, let's say if you want to look at brain tumors, what makes brain tumors so difficult? A general problem. What is brain tumor difficult? Instead of saying, I want to discover that pathway or that pathway. So I think in grant writing, it's all about writing your ideas, and then not so much to get the money, but really to write down your ideas. And that convinces us that the reviewers often, oh yeah, that is really an interesting problem. We give them the money.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I just wanted to share the screen of what I think is the most important point. So this is my NIH status page, and green down here below is successful grants. Let's see if I can find it. Down there, red was unsuccessful, so is brown. The yellow means keep trying. So keep trying, that's one message. And the other is a lot of the problems in these are exactly what Nino says, is they're not addressing fundamental mechanisms. And I think it is a very difficult frame shift to think the way we do clinically to successful research funding. So that's all. I'll share that screen. I'm only going to be so open.
Yeah, so that was honest. I want to pick on Ariana. You did something different. You know, you did a global health sort of thing. Ariana, and then maybe ask Rob Bono, our newest assistant professor. Ariana, any insights into the process?
So yeah, I think I went a little non-traditional, but in terms of insights into the process, even if for those residents who are interested in things other than basic science research, there are several funding mechanisms out there. It's just a matter of really doing some research into the NIH options as well as the UW options here. I'm currently going to be looking into hopefully some K awards that actually focus on global health, although I'm not sure how the climate around that's going to be in the setting of COVID right now. But I would just say that if your interests don't necessarily match some of the grant applications, that there are other mechanisms, and to keep looking, and I'm happy to talk with them about the ones that I've found so far.
Yeah, specifically, why don't you tell them what you got funded? What it was.
Oh yeah, so I had actually gotten the Global Innovation grant through the UW here. It was funding to actually focus on educational initiatives around neurocritical care and neurosurgery in Cambodia. I've also been working with some of our partners over in Duke, over in Uganda as well. So right now I'm trying to put together another project with our Cambodian colleagues. It's just been paused, honestly, right now due to all the travel restrictions.
But that was pretty amazing. Jeff and I were pretty impressed that you went into the global health realm and were able to secure a pretty successful grant, and you wrote papers and actually developed protocols. Rob, you did something different. Why don't you describe that, Rob Bono?
Yeah, so during residency, my research time was spent at the Injury Center, which it's another great spot in the system here, with lots of expertise from all over the realm of clinical research, epidemiologists, MPHs, et cetera. There's lots of good support there. And if people are interested in clinical research, particularly research with large data sets, quality improvement style things, that's a great place to work. I'd also echo Ariana's recommendation that look into non-traditional or other sources for funding. There are some great resources here in the university, like the Global Innovation Grant that she received. There's also others that we're putting in for a grant through the psychiatry department of all departments, and there's other neurosurgery foundational grants worth pursuing as well.
Right. Is there anybody, Pierre? You've had some unique grants with residents. You want to describe another avenue?
Yes. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for bearing your soul there. We all get discouraged because NIH is famous for trying to find ways of, in my view, rejecting grants rather than trying to find ways of moving them forward. Jeff, you mentioned that the lesson you've learned, among the lessons you've learned, is that you need to focus for NIH on mechanistically oriented grants. Sadly, I agree. I think the HEAL initiative, which deals with pain, and some of the brain initiatives are a counterexample because some of them are really targeted towards moving ideas along. But what I wanted to emphasize was, go ahead and write that mechanistic grant. Essentially, emphasize something that perhaps is not so important to you. And once you get the money, you can then do something that you feel is more important, because NIH is incredibly flexible. That's my comment.
Do you have your comments on that?
Well, I'm sort of reconciling that with Nino's voice in my head, so I think we'll just leave it as I was probably have lived my life like Pierre said, but I still wonder if that's writing a grant just sort of because you think it's getting the money is the challenge. That's hard to get your passion through in those.
But I think one of the important things is once you get the money, it start to think already about the next grant, you know, the renewal. So basically you have to say, hey, how is this moving, the field moving forward? And then by the end, you write the progress report and you realize, oh, wow, I did everything what I promised, but I did 10 times more, which actually helps me to get the next grant. So it's always thinking forward.
Andrew Coe, any thoughts on perspectives on this?
Muted.
Yeah, Andrew. He may be in the OR. He's starting a case.
So I would, just looking at the clock, and I actually would request that we give the last word to the person who really gets us over the finish line is Tran, and if she would.
Oh, it would be great, Tran. Yes.
What do you need us to do?
Good morning. I never take this as you know, it is a team to take it to the finish line. So without the residents' motivation to get the grant submitted, without Sharon's pushing things forward, without multiple reminders from Dr. E, Dr. Ojemann, and all the chiefs and the chief residents, we would not be here. So I think the one thing that I've been struggling, and I totally understand why it is going this way, is please responsive to our request. I know the residents are extremely busy. I have your pager, I have your cell phone, and when I call, it is critical. I'm not just calling you for fun. So and then, you know, we as an administrative team, and including the ABC pre-award service, we will do everything to get you to the finish line. And that's all it is. So we just need the collaboration. Thank you. You guys doing a great job. And I'm so excited to see the volume of submission and also the awarded amounts and all of that stuff.
Yeah, this was great. Jeff really exceeded all expectations. I'm sorry that you didn't get to speak on your research. I know you're smarter than all of us, so you planned it that way. That was really very clever. I like that. But having said that, Jeff, I'm going to work with Julie. This was so good that a few more of these a year to keep us focused on this being one of our missions. You know, have Manny or Louis or, you know, Andrew or Mike talk about their research and how they got there. Not just talk about what they did, Nino. And that's Nino, what Nino said was so important. Have a great idea, a solution to solve. But all the, you know, Jeff, like you just showed, amazing. You know, how many times you turned down. I mean, when I first got here, I was so embarrassed at 7 or 8 grants turned down before I got my first grant. And I thought I was the dumbest guy in the world. Now I know I am, but that's just typical. I mean, the fact that you show that, Jeff, makes us all feel a little better. So I appreciate your honesty.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Thank
thank you
to everybody. That was great, Jeff. Standing ovation for that.
All right. Talk to you later.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.